Hi, it's Cara and welcome to my December wrap-up. So it's a little bit into January now. I think it's the 4th, but I am not a person who can do my wrap-up before the end of the month. So we're here. It's probably by the time you see this, probably a couple more days away. And it is wrap-up time. I read quite a few things this month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 things and 1 DNF. So we'll be going through those today. I'm actually really proud of myself. I was really busy in December, but somehow managed to get through a lot. So I'm very proud of myself. But let's talk about them now. So I started December reading Undying by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. This is the sequel to Unearthed. I listened to Unearthed on audiobook, but I ended up reading the physical copy for Undying. I have talked about this in a 5-star predicts wrap-up. I did enjoy it a lot, but I do think it was maybe not the strongest ending. This is I'm gonna move you that way a little bit. This is a YA sci-fi kind of Indiana Jones-esque story with aliens. We're following Earth kind of in the future where technology is kind of or more we're going to like apocalypse level, lack of resources, etc, etc. And then Earth discovers these messages from an alien race, and they think it holds the future for the world to improve, and it's a whole big drama. But essentially I enjoyed this, but I do think the ending was a little bit simplistic and cheap, I guess. Like, it was a pretty predictable ending, but overall I think the duology is decently strong. I do enjoy everything this writing duo puts out. They're great fun, but maybe not like the highest. Like, it doesn't have the same plot twist that Illuminate has. You feel. Next up, I did listen to this one on audiobook. This is the exact opposite of Okay by Laura Stephen. This is a rom-com, I guess. They're really not a rom, more a com. We follow, our main character's name is Izzy, and she is a budding comedian, but also like a self-proclaimed slut. She's very happy to be promiscuous and very like proud's probably not the right word, but like she's not ashamed of it at all. It's just part of who she is. She's happy to go out and romance woo guys. And then there's a bit of a scandal where some nudes etc leak that somehow somebody got a hold of, and the slut shaming runs rampant, and it's kind of her dealing with her career or her potential career being really impacted by this whole scandal, her friendships, and how all that ties in. There are a couple of problems I had with this. Most of them are with the audiobook, though there is a few jokes in here that are probably not super tasteful, but I think it's just the way the author was trying to push Izzy's comedy aspect, but some of them were a bit not very good, in my opinion. The problem that mostly I had with this, which is why I would probably give it, if I was star rating in December, which I wasn't, it would be like a 2.5, is because the author is British, the characters are American, the audiobook was narrated by someone who used a British accent for all the narrative, and then American accents for the dialogue, except the main character is American and it's a first person narration. So she speaks British in her internal monologue, but American in her dialogue, and it's just very off-putting. It definitely put me off the audiobook. The actual content I thought was really interesting and thoughtful, the way it addressed slut shaming and femininity and sex positivity, but some of the jokes were a bit crass and probably inappropriate. Next up, I read Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the first in the spin-off duology to the Raven cycle. So it's the first in the Dreamer trilogy. I really enjoyed this. We follow Ronan and a couple of other Dreamers, Jordan and Hennessy, and then we also follow Carmen, who is a Dreamer hunter, and it's kind of looking a lot more into the dreamscape and a lot of Ronan's family history. And I thought this was such a great exploration of Ronan's character. I enjoyed my time reading this, though the ending was super confusing and I don't really know that I understand what was happening. I think it was very cut short, and I think we're going to learn a lot more in book 2, but I feel like it was like a cliffhanger for cliffhanger's sake, and I don't know if I'm a fan of that. But anyway, I read this. It was a good time. Then I read a beast of a novel, and that is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is a sequel to The Poppy War, which is this series is a Chinese inspired fantasy. It's kind of like a historical fantasy based on historical events of the Opium Wars, and the Rape of Nanking was featured in the first book, but I don't really know the specific war things that were included in this. But it's a very military story, and it looked, this particular installment I think looked a lot at colonialism. We see what I assume are British or American troops, and the clash between the Western and the Eastern ideologies, and kind of this very Catholic Western viewpoint being pushed on to I don't know, the colonialism and that kind of components in here, and the all of that dialogue and exploration was amazingly done. I thought it was very thought-provoking, very cleverly constructed. I was very impressed. I would recommend this series to everyone. It is a dark fantasy, so be prepared. It does have a lot of like grimdark themes, I guess, like a lot of violence. And sorry, I keep looking at my cat, she's being adorable. And they are kind of slower paced for a military. It's a lot more about political machinations and maneuvering. Man! Than war moments. So the action is kind of sporadic, and a lot of it is political maneuverings, but it is absolutely fascinating, and I would 100% recommend this series. I can't wait for book 3, which is coming out sometime in 2020. Can't believe you. Next we have my DNF of the month, and that was The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. This is apparently a time travel fantasy heisty novel. I kind of get that. I got about 100 pages in. Sorry, she's being nuts. I got about I still have my bookmark in here. I got 97 pages in, and I just was so bored. I wasn't connected to the characters or the plot, and I thought by 100 pages into a 500 page novel I really should have been. So I just gave up. Some people love this. I think it's the most underhyped fantasy of like the last year or so. Book 2 came out last year, and I think book 3 is coming out in 2020. But I just really couldn't get into it. I really struggled, and I was dreading picking it up, so I gave it the old DNF. Then, for a bit of change of pace, I read a poetry book. This is Fierce Fairy Tales by Nikita Gill. This is poetry and a little bit of prose that's based around, as you could guess it, fairy tales. I got this out from my library. I enjoyed this, but I am learning the poetry is not really for me. I think it just kind of rehashed the same themes a few too many times, and I started to lose interest by about halfway through. I felt like I was just hearing the same thing and it was kind of going in one ear and out the other. So I think for me, a collection of poetry kind of loses its power. If I'm analyzing and studying singular poems, I really enjoy them and find them meaningful and impactful, but a collection of poems I really struggle with. There are some other poets I do want to check out, but and I think I would get more or try out more from Nikita Gill, but poetry is just something I need to approach like few and far between. Then I read The Power by Naomi Alderman. This I don't know how to talk about. I hated my time reading this, but also thought it was so powerful and so impactful. But it is so disconcerting and difficult to read. We essentially follow ma'ams. We follow, I'm gonna become Whitney, like just yelling at her cats. Like, ma'ams, ma'ams. These noodles. We follow a world where one day the girls develop suddenly the ability to send electricity through their touch and become more powerful than men, or the capacity to be more powerful than men. And it's kind of like how far imbalances of power can go, and it's kind of framed as if it's being published in a world where women are, it is a matriarchal society. Women have always, as far as everyone is aware, been the dominant group, I guess, and men have always been subservient to girls. And the exploration of power dynamics and the way we talk to each other between men and women is really explored in this, very subtly in that way. So the book is written supposedly, like within the realms of the story, by a man who is positing that perhaps there was an event that men were once the dominant sex, and at some point something changed, and there was a big catastrophe that wiped that history from existence. So this is his like posited narrative of how that could have played out, and it's very impactful, very distressing and disturbing, but I think it's super important for people to read. I feel like it's such a good critique on power dynamics, and I think it also does a good job of not falling into these binary stereotypes. We see characters that are, I guess, intersex to some degree, men who exhibit these powers but are perhaps limited in their capacity to do so, the women who also struggle with their powers and how that is dealt with and considered within this society. It's so powerful, and I just, yes, I definitely recommend this, but it is harsh to read. There are definitely trigger warnings for sexual violence, general violence, gore. There's probably a lot of other triggers that I'm not expressly familiar with that probably would be present in this. It is very distressing to read, but it is also very powerful if you feel like you can cope with that. Then I listened to a couple of audiobooks. I was going up to mum and dad's for a bit, so I did a lot of listening to audiobooks on the drive. So the first one of those is The Monster of Ellenhaven by Jennifer Ebrecht. I'm not looking at it, so I can't remember. This is a Tor novella. I think it's a novella. I think it's published by Tor, or Tor.com. And this features Johan, who is a monster that regenerates, and he lives in Ellenhaven. And we also follow, I can't remember the other character's name. It's a little bit of a, it's a male-male romance, but in this gothic setting. Really, it's like a gothic monster story of like the monster who is clearly a physical monster and the monster who is like a monstrous person, and how this all interconnects. And it's so good. I loved it. I enjoyed my time reading it. I did have to reread the first half. I listened to the first half at work, but basically took none of it in because I was working, and it was one of those stories that I really wanted to absorb properly. So I went back and listened from the start, and I absolutely adored it. It was so entertaining. Loved it to pieces. I also listened to The Kingdom of Needle and Bone by Shauna Maguire. Mira Grant. I think it's a Mira Grant story, which is Shauna Maguire's pen name. This was nuts. It's a story following a plague that comes through of measles, which is kind of attacks people who it kind of jumped on the vaccination. It was talking about anti-vax movements and things like that. It was kind of a critique of that. And so everyone kind of gets this measles plague, and measles as in itself has a tendency to knock out immunity, but this knocked out your ability to be re-immunized as well. And it was all about them trying to find a way to be safe from this disease. The plot twist at the end, I do think, wasn't explained enough for me to really feel the power of it. It felt a little cheap. And also the only other problem I had with it was there was just a level, I'm a scientist, I especially work in like medicine, and the level of detail was like there but not there. Like, I'm pretty sure measles affects your immunity by attacking your T cells, which is how mediated immunity works. Like, your immunity to things you've been exposed to, like vaccinations, work through T cells, I'm pretty sure. If I'm remembering my cells correctly, there's a particular cell type that essentially you have lots of them floating through your body, and they're all randomly generated. But if one hooks on to an invading pathogen, virus, it then replicates itself a heap of times, and you keep it floating in your system forever. I'm pretty sure measles attacks those kind of cells, so you lose the ones that are floating from the ones you've already experienced it, but then your body can generate more T cells. So I wanted to understand how the science behind this version that failed, you couldn't re-immunize, worked. Was it destroying T cell stem lines? Like, I know this is probably going all over your head, but I felt like it was so scientific other than that component, and it just kind of like fell a little flat there on the science for me. I wanted to know more detail about how this was theoretically possible, because there was so much like thought and science put into the epidemiology and spread of the disease, but less into like the mechanics, and I just wanted to know a little bit more. But really the bit that kind of drew it most down was the ending for me. I think the twist was a little bit like, but why? The decision making didn't make sense to me. Another audiobook I read was The Westing Game by Ellen somebody? Raskin? No. Yeah, Ellen Raskin. This is a puzzle-based story. It's all about this group of people who find themselves all living in the same apartment building near a mansion, and suddenly the person who owns the mansion and the apartment building dies, and they find out they're all somewhat connected, and he's like secretly trying to figure out who killed someone. It's a big mystery, and it's a lot about puzzles and solving puzzles. I loved this. It was so entertaining. I wish I had read a physical copy so I could have seen the pictures. I think I need to hunt down a physical copy to look at the pictures, because there is pictures apparently. I was so fascinated. The story was so entertaining. I definitely recommend it. It's probably a middle grade story, I think, but like a high middle grade. And I love the puzzle stories. I just love them so much. I also read Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats because I went and saw Cats at the cinema. So I read T.S. Eliot's Cats. Love the book of poetry. Entertaining as all hell. Love that. Did I love the movie? No. Was I thoroughly entertained? Yes. But we read the book of poetry. That was fun. I think I loved that as poetry because I'm familiar with it, so that was fun. Then back to physical books we read. We read Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the third book in the Folk of the Air trilogy. I didn't really like this that much. There were some components I liked, but I do think the pacing was a bit off. We had a lot of time jumps that didn't really make sense to me. And then the pace kind of moved in fits and spurts, which I didn't appreciate. It's also pretty small. It's like barely 300 pages, 305 pages, and everything just kind of happened all at once, and there just wasn't quite enough development. I feel like it just needed more pages and more time put into it. But It was fine. I think it's like a 3-star kind of end to the series. I think the trilogy as a whole is like a 4-star trilogy, but this was by far the weakest book. I'm not even going to synopsis this. I feel like you should have heard of The Cruel Prince by now. Then I read Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. This is a Discworld novel, part of his Discworld series. This one focuses around death and Christmas, but they call it Hogswatch. Essentially, the Hogfather, or Father Christmas, has gone missing, and Death steps in to pretend to be him to keep the spirit of Hogswatch alive. This is so entertaining. I have seen the movie, so I knew the plot of this, but I knew this was going to be one of my favorite Discworld novels. I love Death's novels the most, and I was thoroughly entertained by this. It's just so fun. The only thing I wish these books had was chapters, but they just don't. They just have a lot of like scene breaks, so you gotta learn to treat them like chapters, but like whatever. Then I read The Toll by Neil Shusterman, which is the 3rd and final book in the Archivist Scythe series, and oh, this is like magic. It's chunky, so like the opposite of the Queen of Nothing. This went all out. It had a lot in it. Where the series follows a world, if you didn't know, where death has been eradicated, so that people are ordained to kill other people, and they're called scythes, and so they're kind of tasked with population control. And this final book really explored the start of the scythedom, why it came about, and what the world's going to look like going forward, having considered the previous 2 novels. And it was just so good. Nothing felt cheap or simple or easy. It was all complicated. I do think the romance in this series isn't really necessary, but like they could have just been platonic soulmates kind of thing. It didn't need to be a romance, but it's so good. Like, this series is so good. If you haven't read it yet, you really need to, because all 3 are masterpieces. Then I listened to my final audiobook of the month, which was Please Send Help by Gabby Dunn and Alison Raskin. This is their second novel. Gabby and Alison ran I don't think it's still active, but their YouTube series, they were used to be on Buzz, they're part of BuzzFeed. And then they had their own web series called Just Between Us, which was like a question and answer series, and they've done sketches and stuff, and then they've been writing novels, and this is the second novel. It's a new adult rom-com-y kind of thing, but all told, I guess, epistolary, but like texts and emails. This was so entertaining. It looked at like careers and how to deal with changes in your career and things not going the way you planned, office romances, STDs, all around. It was just very, very entertaining. The audiobook's also read by Gabby and Alison, so that was fun as well, and also helped me distinguish the characters because I know their voices, because I used to watch the web series a lot. I wouldn't recommend this for everyone, but like if you're fans of Gabby and Alison, definitely go check it out. They're a fun time. Then I read 5 Dark Fates by Kendara Blake. This is the 4th and final book in the 3 Dark Crowns Queens of Fenburn series. I didn't hate this. Some people did. I personally thought it was alright. This series essentially follows triplet sisters that are queens, but one of them will be the crowned queen, but they have to fight to the death to figure out who that is. I do think perhaps there was a little bit too much of a happy ending, but I did really like how the ending went, and this series is pretty gruesome and dark at times. It does have a weird POV tense situation, which I think puts some people off, but I personally don't mind it. And it does kind of have a pacing problem, I guess, where it doesn't really focus on the action, it focuses on the character moments, but it's still really entertaining, and I did really enjoy this whole series. I think it's like a 3.5 4-star series for me, though the second novella in the novella collection is a piece of genius. And finally, this month I finished Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, which is the sequel to Skyward. This is a series about Spencer, who really wants to be a pilot, but her dad was branded a coward and a traitor, and they live on this planet where a small group of humans have kind of like escaped alien forces, but they're constantly under attack. And this second book really like blew the world wide open. A lot of things are happening, and it was very entertaining. I do think Brandon Sanderson in his like Cosmere world and other novels normally puts at the start of every like sequel kind of a rundown of what happened in the previous book, but in like an exposition, which I really enjoy. This kind of got blended in to our main character's internal monologue, because this is told in first person, and it does result in a really cheesy beginning with a lot of info dumping, but once you're like 100 pages in, things are smooth sailing and it's action packed and so fast paced, and I absolutely love it. Can't wait to read book 3 because that ending was nuts. So those are all the books I read in the month of December. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them down below. I'd love to chat about them, though please stay spoiler free for anyone else. But feel free to DM me if you want to talk spoilers, or DM me on Twitter. My Twitter is always linked down below. Otherwise, let me know if you are wanting to read any of these and if my opinion has swayed you. I would love to know. Otherwise, I will see you soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!